Kia ora and welcome everybody. Now look, before I formally open up with a speech from the chair, I'd like to invite Whaia Merle to open the session formally with a karakia. So Whaia Merle, if you would do the honours, please.
Whaia Merle, do you want to use your own karakia or we have one to share? It's really over to you. We'll take your lead. Oh, we can't hear you.
It might be muted. Sorry, Mel.
You're muted.
Unmute, Mel. Down the bottom on the left. That's it.
Yes.
Kia ora mai anō tata katoa, nei tētahi te karakia tīmatatanga. Let's open with an opening prayer, share on the first words of this morning. I'd like to welcome you all here. Kia ora mai tātou, e noi tātou. He honore, he karoria ki te atua, he maunga rongo ki te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Hanga e te atua, he ngā kauhau. Kei roto i tēnā o mātou, whakatongia kei rungi a mātou ko te maramatanga o te rānei mō mātou kaupapa, mō Collaborative Aotearoa, ana tēnā koutou ki te atua mō mātou manaakitanga, ake tonu ake, āmene. Kia ora mai tata katoa, Mark Amajit, ko mātou tīma hoki, rauranga tirama. Nō reira, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora Mel, kia ora Mel. Thank you. No ingarangi o kutipuna, ko verta awa whakahirihiri ki reira. No te tainga mai ahau a Aotearoa, ka noho o i Waiariki. Ko maua o te maunga mo te haki ki au, ko Mark Little toku ingoa, ko o te manukura mō Pegasus Health. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So welcome everybody, my name's Mark Little and I am the chair of Collaborative Aotearoa and also the chief executive or manukura at Pegasus Health here in Canterbury. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here to our long overdue Collaborative Aotearoa Council meeting. We've all seen a lot of change over the last couple of years and we've dealt with and are still dealing with many urgent issues relating to the pandemic. Kia kaha to you all. We also have many changes coming as a result of the health reforms. So what's changed for our collaborative? Firstly, our healthcare home collaborative is now Collaborative Aotearoa. The reasoning behind this shift is really to acknowledge our broader mahi. Along with the important healthcare home model, the team are supporting digital health across primary care and are supporting a collective impact approach to future localities. The changes are also a direct response to our health reforms so that we can continue to support our general practice teams to formally become a wellbeing partner in a locality setting. Our sharing and learning approach can be applied to other models of care too, and the collaborative continues to act as a catalyst for change and implementation. Its focus remaining strongly on models of care and practical support for those at the front line. We walk alongside those delivering the care in our communities. Our commitment to te reti o Waitangi, equity and lived experience leadership remains front and centre. We value our trusted relationships and hold whakawhanaungatanga at our very core. Many of you have been on this journey for some time now and will no doubt continue to proactively embrace change. We continue to thank you all for your strong support. As part of our agenda today, you will hear from the rest of our governance members and the collaborative team. But first to our keynote, Paul Schmitz. Welcome all the way from Milwaukee, where it is yesterday right now, Paul. Paul will share his wisdom on centering equity in collective impact, and we'll discuss how we as leaders hold ourselves accountable for ensuring equity. So Paul, I'll hand over to you and welcome you to tomorrow and to the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I look at all of you and all I can say is the future looks bright. And where you are, I'm a year older than I am here because my birthday is May 6th, but it's still May 5th here where I am. So I'm like trying to do the mind bend around the idea that I'm a year older where you are than here and like how that all works and whether I can like manipulate that in some way to for my benefit. But it's great to be with you all from America, where we're very collaborative and calm and nothing's happening here. We're all like, everything's cool. Like it's a lot going on here as well, and in our country and in our communities, and it's great to have this chance to kind of share with you some of what we're learning, at least around this work, which has been so important. I have spent the last I came to Collective Impact and this work when I was part of President Obama's Domestic Policy Council. I had led a national nonprofit in the US for 21 years that did grassroots community building in 25 cities. And through that work became part of the President's White House Council for Community Solutions. And a lot of people said to us, let's find those best evidence-based programs in the country and scale them up. And that made a certain amount of sense. But something kept gnawing at me about that. And it really hit me in April of 2010. The headline of my local newspaper that morning, in my hometown where I live, was that we had the worst reading scores for African-American children in the country. And yet that afternoon, I received a newsletter from the largest youth-serving organization in the city, boasting about all the outcomes it was achieving with the 15,000 children they serve. And that disconnect really hit me about like thinking about how many great programs we had in our community and the outcomes they were producing and the good work they were doing. But when we added it all up, we still had these awful results at the community level. And I went back to the council and said, what if instead of looking for great programs, we looked at, are there cities where they've moved the whole population measure? Is there a city where the reading scores are up 20 points or teen pregnancy has been cut in half? And let's look at those. And we found about 25 cities that had had major changes like that. And we found these same practices in all of them. And out of that work, we helped create the Collective Impact Forum, which spun out at that time. And for the last 8 years, I've been a senior advisor to the Collective Impact Forum and have, previous to the pandemic, was spending 60% of my time on the road, traveling around, talking to people. I've made 2 visits to New Zealand in the past. Since that time, I've been doing it all on Zoom with a little bit of travel. But over the course of time, I've visited more than 200 collective impact efforts. And last year, in the fall, was the 10th anniversary of the original article that coined the term collective impact. And I like to point out, they didn't invent collective impact with the article. They were describing something they had seen where communities asked the same question I asked. Why are there all these great programs doing good work, but when we add it up, we're not seeing the needle move on these hard issues in our community? And they'd come up with the same thing. And that's what I want to talk about today, is what we've come to learn about collective impact and how we're kind of thinking about those practices, especially in terms of equity. And to start, I want to start with the definition. We actually, as part of our kind of 10th anniversary look at the field, we asked what have we learned over the last 10 years, and what's the most important thing we could share after 10 years of doing this work? And we decided that the most important thing we could share was about the fact that this work really needs to center on equity to be effective. If we're trying to move population level change, the work has to be equitable. And we came up with a new or a renewed definition of collective impact that focuses on the fact that it's a network of community members, including residents and people with lived experience, organizations and institutions that advance equity by learning together, aligning and integrating their actions to achieve population and systems level change. And so the idea here is that what we're always aiming at is to have equity in our communities. We want all people to be able to fulfill their potential, even though people start in very different places. To do that, we have to move the change at the population level or system level that produces that. And the way we do that is by bringing these networks together and helping them to learn and coordinate and align and integrate their work to get there. And so when we think about collective impact, it really is about this kind of idea of how do we work with networks to advance their work in ways that create system and population change. We've typically thought of collective impact as having 5 key elements. The first is a common agenda, a strategy that's very clear and precise, that is organized around what's the change we're trying to move, and has strategies that are at the scale and sophistication necessary to move that needle. So if I'm trying to reduce infant mortality in an area of the city where there are 15,000 women of childbearing age and 1,500 live births a year, I can't say my strategy is to do a mentoring program for 50 women and to do 3 workshops a year. I have to think, what would it really take to move 1,500 birth outcomes in a more positive direction? And so my strategy, or the agenda we create, needs to really figure out what would it really take to move that needle. Then once we've identified that strategy, we've got to be able to share data and measure our progress together. So we've got to be able to collect and measure data across organizations and groups to see how we're making progress on our agenda and to adjust as we move along. In an effort here that was working on teen pregnancy, in the early years, they noticed that for the Latino population in my city, it was going down, it was not going down where it was for the Black and white populations. And so they then adapted their strategy, pulled in a new task force of people because they were looking at data and measuring progress in real time and adjusting as they went. Whoops. Then we have to align action. That the idea is that often to get that agenda accomplished, we need multiple organizations or groups working together to make that work happen. And sometimes that also importantly includes community members, as often the people who can have the most influence on people who are intended beneficiaries are the people closest to them. But we've got to make sure that we're aligning all the people needed to move that population together towards that outcome. To do that, we have to have a form of continuous engagement. We got to be bringing people together. There's meetings where we're coordinating action. There's ways we're bringing people together, collaborate. We're doing engagement of community members. And to keep all this going, to keep this strategy moving, to collect data and evaluate and share measurements so we can align our work, to keep people coordinated and moving in the same direction, and to facilitate all the engagement, we need a backbone staff who are skilled at doing the facilitation and project management to kind of keep everyone moving forward. So when we think about collective impact, we think about these 5 elements being brought together. And simply, what we also find is that they're really just the best practices effective coalitions have always done. When we look at coalitions through history, we find that they typically have this clear, really precise agenda. They're measuring progress. They're aligning partners to work together. They're continuing to meet, and they're facilitating and managing people to work together to get it done. And so that's in a simple sense of what collective impact is. But as I shared, the thing that we found is that one of the most important things people can learn about doing this work has to do with equity. And in our lessons, we found that the clearer the strategy, the easier it is for people to commit, that the form of a collective impact has to follow the strategy or function of what it does, and that culture eats strategy for breakfast. That if we build a collective to move a set of goals, but we don't build a culture that is more inclusive, more collaborative, more accountable, more equitable, that trust and other things will break down and often get in the way of our ability to achieve results. So to do those 5 things well, we've got to make sure the strategy is really clear, because that's what gets people to the table. We need to make sure we organize people around that strategy, and we've got to build a culture. And to do these 3 things well, equity has to be there. Equity has to be there in what the strategy is. It has to be in who we bring around what tables to do the work. And we have to build a culture that embraces it. So let me talk about what equity is. That historically in our context, where I am in the US and in many other places I've been, our approach in philanthropy, policy, and social service has been more around equality. The idea that if we get people equal access to the same opportunities or services or interventions, then we expect that they'll all get to the same results. And what we found in when we look at data is that doesn't happen, because people start in different places and have different barriers. And so an equity approach acknowledges that people start in different places, and to move people towards the result that we'd love everyone to get to, we have to differentiate what we do. The definition we use is that equity is fairness and justice achieved through systematically assessing and addressing disparities in opportunities, outcomes, and representation, and redressing those disparities through targeted actions. So we're looking at where does disparity exist in the opportunities for people and the outcomes they're achieving, and in who's at the tables making decisions. And then how do we redress those through taking targeted actions so we can move to a more equitable situation. To do that, we identified 5 strategies that help groups center equity in the work of collective impact. The first is grounding the work in data and context and targeting solutions. And to that, there's a practice called targeted universalism. And simply it's saying, we have a universal goal. Let's say that universal goal is that we'd like all kids to read at grade level in 3rd grade. We then disaggregate the data in our community about who's achieving that goal and who isn't, and understand if there are disparities among different subpopulation groups by race, by geography, by gender, or other differences. But we look to see, are there some populations further behind than others in relationship to our goal? Then for those populations further behind, we have to ask, are there specific structures or things that might be impeding that group differently than other groups? And then we target our work towards those impediments so we can move everybody to that goal. And so the idea of really targeted universalism is the notion that with data, we can understand where disparities are and then differentiate our work to make sure that every population has a pathway to the goal, versus providing the same service to everyone, not acknowledging that different groups have different impediments or things in their way. So that's the first piece around really the data and targeting the work and grounding that work. The second is focusing on systems change, including in addition to programs and services. If we understand that the impediments that often block people might not be just in their lives who we're trying to serve, but might be larger systems or structures that are in the way, then we recognize that we might have to address systems changes. And when we talk about systems change, we're talking about changing the conditions that hold the problem in place, those larger structures or systems that might be preventing people from moving forward. And that can include things like mental models and narratives, the way people understand the issue, or biases people hold about the issue or the population with that issue. Relationships and connections, the ways in which the people who do the work on that issue are connected or not, can be getting in the way of people being helped. So if we have, if we're working on education and the after school programs don't know which kids are falling behind in school, but the kids go there after school every day and they don't know which kids are ahead or behind, that lack of connection is preventing them from most effectively helping those kids. And so recognizing where are those breaks in relationships and connections in our system that can be getting in the way. Power dynamics, who has power in decision-making on the issue and who's heard and listened to, could be something getting in the way, as the people who are making decisions might not know the issue or the people well enough to do that. And that can be blocking progress. The way resources flow to the issue could be a system that is getting in the way. The rules and practices and the ways the work is done. And then finally, public policies. And so when we think about equity, we have to think about not just how do we serve the person, but are there larger systems changes that are necessary if we're going to allow that population to have a better path towards the outcomes we're seeking. And so thinking of systems change as well as programs and interventions when we think about what's needed to create equitable outcomes. The third is about shifting power within the collaborative. And there we have to understand that we define power as the ability or authority to influence others, to decide who will have access to resources, and to define reality or exercise control over oneself and others. We look at formal authority, which is those who are in a position where they control resources or decisions, and informal authority, which is those who have influence that result from the level of relationship and credibility they have with stakeholders. And when building a table, we need both. We need people with formal authority, but when we have people who have formal authority, often they can act in ways that demonstrate that power imbalance. And so we have to find ways. We can never solve for the fact that some people probably have more power than others by virtue of controlling resources, but there are things we can do to mitigate that in terms of, again, how we build the culture, how we build agreements, how we build the group to do that. We also have to get real about who's at the tables and how do we build tables to be ready to share power. And if we imagine at the center of the table where we're making decisions, the intended beneficiaries, the issues they're experiencing and the neighborhoods they live in, we have to ask ourselves, how many of us live in the neighborhoods we're trying to impact, or have lived in those neighborhoods, or have family members who live there? How many of us reflect or represent the target population that we're working with, or represent other marginalized groups? How many of us have personal lived experience on the issues we're trying to address, or even have family members with that? How many of us directly work with that target population every day and are in direct relationship and proximity? I'm how to manage people who do. And the reality is, if we're all on the outside, do we really have the best information about the people, the issues, and the neighborhoods they live in to make the best decisions? And so as we think about power, we also have to recognize that if we don't, we have to give up some of our power at times to make sure we're doing the right things and to share power, because we always don't have the answers. And so if we think about kind of who's at the table, that's one way to analyze where power sits and recognize where we need that to exist. The fourth is about listening to and acting with community, and really thinking about the role of lived experience in that. And we often think of the approach of asset-based community development and the notion of, is the glass half empty or half full? And the correct answer, of course, is it's both. And that every single one of us here today, all the people we work with and all the people we serve, all have fullness. We all have gifts and talents that help us be great family members and friends and workers and leaders and things we love to do and skills we have. We have all of that. But all of us also have emptiness. We have things we don't do well, mistakes we've made, regrets we hold. But community service is often defined as people who are defined by their fullness, going into communities that are defined by their emptiness, to help people who've often been labeled by their emptiness with the notion our job is to fill them up with some of our fullness. We think at best that's arrogant and at worst oppressive. And that to do this work in an equitable way, we have to flip the way we think things in a more asset-based approach and understand that everybody has both. And it's a question of, as leaders, where are we starting? What are we looking for? What are we recognizing and lifting up? And to understand that in any community where we find all of these issues, and they exist in my community. And if I wanted to find all these things right now in my city, I could find them. But I can also tell you, in the exact same neighborhoods, I could find all of these things. I could find all of these things as well. And so if we think in an equitable way about community, being asset-based and thinking about acting and listening to community, we have to understand that these assets exist, and how do we think of our community in a more asset-based way and recognize all of the gifts and talents of people in the community we can rely on and partner with in order to produce outcomes. And when we start to think like this, we start to recognize that the woman who checks in on the young mothers in her neighborhood is part of public health in your community, that the man who watches the kids after school on the playground is part of youth development in your community. and to start to understand that community itself is a form of solution. And then we have to think about what's the role of community in solving problems? And what's the promise we make to community in terms of how we're going to do that? And so this is a simple model that's called the community engagement spectrum we like to think about. And simply put, on the left side is we make decisions, and our role is to inform the community of our decisions and orient them to the change we're bringing. Consult is, before we make a decision, we're going to listen to community and get some perspective from them that we can consider before we make decision. And then we need to let them know how their point of view influenced or didn't our decision. Then there's involved, which is at every step of our process, we're listening to community and engaging community, from defining the problem to exploring options to making decisions. Collaborate is that we partner with the community, that at every level of our process, the community is co-equal to the agencies or leaders in making decisions about what's happening in community. And empower is community members make decisions and we support whatever they decide. The challenge we see is too often people use language on the right side of the spectrum, but deliver engagement on the left side, which creates a lot of dissonance and often builds distrust. We think wherever you are on the spectrum, you have to make that promise and fulfill that promise and not promise more than you're willing to deliver. But we think every group should always ask themselves, what would it take for us to take a step to the right? And to think, as a colleague did, we wrote about in our article, like, before they make decisions, the people with lived experience in the room have the last word. Or with another group I'm working with, where they've built a table, a resident leadership table that sits between their action networks, which lead their collective impacts in their steering committee. And they decide the work from the action committees gets reviewed by the resident table, and they make recommendations to the board based on it, so that they're the ones overseeing that work. There's lots of ways people have creatively thought about how do we shift power and listen to community in new ways and really create that space for community to participate and not just be listened to, but to be partners in the effort. In an area of my state where the farmer population has been really hit hard, the suicide rate among farmers is the highest in the state. They asked themselves, who do farmers trust? And they came up with answers like seed dealers, the mechanics, the equipment implementers, their bankers even. And what they did is they did mental health first aid training with those folks, recognizing that the people already in relationship with them were the best people to produce those outcomes versus outsiders they didn't know. And so when they thought about who can deliver outcomes, they didn't just think of agencies, they thought of who are the people closest to the people. So when you think about listen and act with community, it's both listening and acting. It's how is community part of the solution? And the final piece of centering equity is, how do we be accountable as leaders? If leadership's an act of responsibility, how do we act accountable? How are we accountable for equity as leaders? And we've come up with some practices that we think help leaders who are in formal authority roles at this point be more accountable for leading with equity. The first is that they seek out authentic relationships to share and learn, that they're self-aware of their need and recognize, who do I listen to? What's the bubble I'm in? How do I build relationships with people who are different from myself and really share and learn, whether they're at the same status level I am, but really trying to think about, how do I broaden the level of relationships I have and that I listen to? That they make visible commitments that with clear goals and expectations, and invite those employees or stakeholders in their groups to hold them accountable. So they say, we're not going to host any meetings where at least the majority of people in the room don't come from X community. And we'll be accountable for that. They make clear commitments and invite people to hold them accountable for that. The third is that they, if they're leading an organization, they look at their policies and their compensation promotion and analyze them to see, are there biases or disparities? And then they set clear goals around where those disparities are and think about, what do we need to do? And if they find that there are problems, they redress those harms. And they acknowledge what harm that's done. The fifth is that they make sure if they're at tables that they're making sure that there's diversity at those tables, that they won't make or enable decisions without those perspectives and participation being heard. The sixth is building and sharing power, transmitting it and your privilege and not hoarding it. And here, the example I always like to give is when people think about like, when people have power and privilege, there's two things you can do with it. You can hold it for people like yourself. So you see an internship and you contact the college that you went to and you ask the professor for some of the best students, versus thinking more broadly about what other kinds of people could you offer opportunity to. Or you see opportunities and you let people you're close to know about them, but you don't think, who are people who might not have access to this knowledge and how do I help get information to them? To how do you break the cycle of reinforcing privilege and who gets opportunities, and think and break outside of that. The seventh is and we use the example of people of color, but showing up for leaders of color, people different from yourself, and their organizations and public issues impacting those communities, not just when your organization's interests are at stake. So when there's an important issue facing a community that you care about, do you show up even when it doesn't affect your self-interest? And that shows people that you're truly committed, not just for yourself, but you're committed to them. And finally, are you willing to take stands and even make risk or sacrifice of resources and relationships in order to stand up for racial equity and justice? I worked with and coached a CEO of a community foundation who had a major donor who had a public event made a racist comment. And she was stunned by it and confronted him at the event. But it was risky because he was one of the largest donors to their foundation. And she went to her board and said, we as an organization made a commitment that racial equity is our North Star. This person clearly doesn't share that value. Should we take their money? And their board made the decision to no longer take this donor's money. And the signal that sent to the community about how serious they were about being accountable for equity was huge. And the trust that they built with community by that was huge, because they showed they were willing to risk resources and sacrifice resources for their values. So these are just examples of ways that leaders can be accountable for practicing equity. So again, you ground the work in data and context and target solutions. You focus not just on programs, but system changes. You think about how are we shifting power and making sure we're not reinforcing the way society normally works within our group. We're listening and acting with community and listening to that lived experience. And we're building equity leadership and making sure that we're being accountable for equity in our work. Those are ways we found that groups can effectively do racial equity work within collective impact. And so what we talked about doing is we'd like to break you up for a few minutes. And we've given you some reflection questions. And I've put those in the chat. And what we'd like you to think about, we're going to break you into small groups for about 15 minutes. We'd like you to think about, what are our current strengths in terms of centering equity as a North Star of our work? How do we balance power differences when collaborating? And how are we holding ourselves accountable for equity as leaders? So we'd like you to spend some time together talking about this, and then we'll come back and I'd love to hear from each of the breakout groups. So if someone in each group could agree to be kind of your spokesperson when we come back, that'd be great. And then we can see if there's any questions. But if that's okay, then I think we're going to send you to your breakouts and then we'll come back and have a conversation. Michael, you ready? Did everyone get invited to a room?
Yeah, everyone should have gotten an invite to a room. So unless, are you having trouble there, Gary, or? Nah, kia ora.
All right.
Oh, cool. I will pause the recording just for a little bit.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. And would love to hear, I can't see who was with who, but if I could ask some of the people who, I had asked if each group could have someone just kind of share a few reflections on your conversation or some questions. I would love that. Who'd like to start me out?
Kia ora, Paul, it's Lance here. We had
Hey,
the, I
Lance.
think we had the best group, so I don't know how they chose it, but all the top people were in our group. And then one of the, so our conversation started on, how do we get to where we are today? And then how, in terms of this equity conversation. And the first thing we acknowledge is that we've all taken 2 hours out of our day to be here. We could have been doing other mahi today, but we've actively chosen to participate in this conversation.
Yeah.
And then that got us thinking about, not me personally, but if you've had alcohol issues, well, I've had those, but I haven't had alcohol counselling. The first part of moving forward is acknowledging there's a problem before you actually do that. So I think a big part of this group and our country is we've acknowledged there's a problem in the healthcare system. In the early 1980s before, we wouldn't be talking about racism and equity, and we all want the same access of opportunities. So we've now acknowledged that. And then as a country, we've gone through internationally Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement. If you recall, in our country, it was illegal to be a gay and lesbian partnership, legal partnership 20 or 30 years ago. Unfortunately, we had the Christchurch terrorist attacks. The country got behind our Muslim community. So I think what you're finding is there's more social awareness on injustices across multiple areas. And therefore this thing called equity is more at the forefront than it may have been historically. And because we're talking about it, and in about 38 days, we'll probably have 40 days, we'll have a piece of legislation that says we actively need to address that through our legislation. So our group was the acknowledgement part of it, the fact that we've acknowledged there was a power imbalance, and we're trying to rectify that. There's still a way to go, right? Because acknowledgement without action just becomes the same. But moving into a sort of revised healthcare system where there is more focus, data will be quite key. That came out of our session. And the data tells you some good stories, but sort of a little bit of self-reflection is what our group had as well, in terms of, well, actually, we've personally gone through some events where we may have recognized the situation could have gone, we could have done things better, and could have the outcome could have been different. But because of that acknowledgement, we've sort of reflected and adjusted our behavior going forward, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So
great,
that
Lance. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. And I agree on the acknowledging. I mean, we're having a fight in the United States right now because we for years have been acknowledging, and now people are trying to get us to, are passing bills trying to get us to stop acknowledging. So like, it's still, I don't want to minimize that piece of it, because we have to own the history in order to correct for it and redress it. And so that is important. And at the same time, I agree, the actions matter, but it's a start to at least begin the space of making that part of the conversation and taking time to have the conversation. Thanks, Lance. Who else would like to share some about your conversation?
Oh, I'll go next if you like. Sorry, and apologies,
Great.
I'm having trouble with my camera at the moment, but
okay.
I've got my IT person trying to sort me out. So as soon as I can, I will come back online. But we actually had the top group, Lance. Sorry to have to tell you that. I think you were sadly mistaken. We talked about some of our current strengths in terms of equity, some of the activities and commitments that we've made within our own organisations. We talked about the importance of culture and embedding a culture of equity across organisation, and it starts at governance, and it needs to filter through everybody so that everyone who's part of the organisation understands equity and the role they play in their role in eliminating inequity. We also talked about the importance of utilising data and knowledge to ensure that we are directing our precious resource in the right areas, and the advancements in our ability to do that lately have, we've gone on leaps and bounds. So that's something that we do think is a current strength, and certainly I'll speak on behalf of other PHOs, I'm sure they'll agree. We wholly rely on that data and intelligence to make sure funding is being directed appropriately. And then we talked about the second part of our discussion was around how do we make sure that we are addressing any power imbalances in the new world when we come together as locality networks. We talked about the importance of, again, relationship being number one, taking that time to understand our collective contributions and each bringing our strengths to the locality work. The importance of everybody having a voice, so agreeing principles in which how localities need to work together. And particularly if there is a backbone organisation that holds the purse strings or that has that control, then we need to have a very clear principled approach in terms of how we're going to work together relationally. And I believe the collaborative partnership charter or locality partnership charter will hopefully support that work.
Great. Lindsay, thank you so much. That's a lot.
Yes.
You guys hit it out of the park on that one. You guys hit every topic. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from another group, and I just want to make sure we get to your council meeting on time.
I'll go next. Kia ora, Paul. Just like to mahi to Lindsay and Lance for the contributions, and we've said probably got a similar theme running through our kōrero to what Lance and Lindsay have just suggested. So I won't repeat that. I'm going to add a bit of the new stuff, I suppose, that hasn't been talked about. We talked about the importance of indigenising spaces, actually, and getting clear around what that means and getting out of the way. Bureaucracy, the hierarchy, we feel that that's an area that we could be working on. We're particularly interested in two of your slides, one around power shift and system review, system change. We'd like to explore that a little bit more. We talked at length about having Te Tiriti o Waitangi knowledge, historical and legal, and not turning that into practical application on the ground to make a shift on the needle. So we talked about that as being a challenge. And we had a really wonderful example from Barb in our group around what you described in terms of collective impact happening on the ground with a whole lot of people who are doing good community work and are by nature public health practitioners. And actually, we're really keen to see more and more of that in the localities and really opening that up and exploring community-driven mahi. So I hope that's done justice to what we talked about, Barb, Martin, and Amaja. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi.
Shall I do a quick
Great.
update from our group? Very, very quick.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Just not to repeat what others have said, manakitanga, centering around Te Tiriti, getting it right for Māori, we'll get it right for everyone. But I think one of the striking things from our group as well was metrics and data. Yep, they tell a story, but they don't always tell the story of what people want. So listening to what people want, I think Marie's comment, 2 ears, 1 mouth, and really engaging with what matters to communities. And yep, smoking rates might be the top priority if you look at the data, but actually it might be food on the table and being safe at night. Thank you, Mark, for really understanding what matters to communities. And then courage and being held accountable, making sure that boards can stand up and talk to what matters and implement what matters. So yeah, hopefully that will reflect the A team.
Great, thank you, Maura, and thank you, Joe and Lindsay and Lance too, and for all of your things. Did that cover all the groups? There were 4 breakouts, right?
There might have been 5, but if everyone has spoken or everyone who wants
Have we
to
heard from
speak
each
has
group?
spoken.
And
Yeah,
thanks,
kia ora,
Gary,
looks
for
like
adding in the chat too. So again, like a couple things. One is the slides I used today, I'll send a PDF to Amarjeet. I sent the last one, and I'll send the one for today right when we're done. I'll also send, there's an article called The Water Systems Change that lays out that pyramid that you asked about, and a toolkit on community engagement that goes through some of, or an article on community engagement that goes through that power shifting paradigm. So happy to share those with you and free to share those. I think it's great that you guys are thinking about how you adapt the collective impact approach to your organizations and dealing with health in your region. And it sounds like you're very thoughtful about this issue of equity within it, which is, again, we just find really central if we're trying to move change. If we want to get to real impact, we find that's the lack of that focus is one thing that holds us back. And so really appreciate you all. Wanted to see, there's just a few minutes left. If there's any like quick question or anything I could cover before we hand it back to Mark and the rest of your meeting.
Thank you, Paul. So open up for questions if anybody has any.
Well, kia ora te, not a question, but in New Zealand, there's an organisation called Social Value Aotearoa, and they're connected into the international sort of SVA social values stuff. So cool. I'd encourage, so all the stuff that we've been presented on today, you know, if you wanted to plug into that locally, I think it's sva.co.nz or .com. But your social, I'll dig out the website link and I'll chuck it into the group chat.
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you, Lance.
Okay, well, if there are no questions or comments, Paul, I'd like to thank you very much. Fascinating, invigorating, reinforcing information that I think we've all got some challenges and some comfort from. So just a brilliant, and look, thank you for the slides as well. And the breakout session, I think, did prompt some really interesting conversation from the minor groups as well as mine. And I think where we landed was a good space. So really appreciate your time and for dialing in. And I was reminded just after you talked about your birthday and dates and ages, many of you will know the great Yogi Berra, who was cited with many interesting sayings like, it's deja vu all over again, or nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. But he did say something equally funny, but probably genius, which was the future ain't what it used to be.
That's true.
People used to laugh at that, but the future ain't what it used to be.
Yeah.
In 1977, I was expecting by now to have a flying car and food in pill form. But aside from that, the world changes continuously. So Yogi had a wee bit of genius.
Mark, you were watching the Jetsons too much, but that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Great to be with you. And I just want to shout out to Karia with the comment on bravery, which is also really critical to this work, that we have to, you know, leadership requires courage, and leadership for equity requires courage. And we've got to be willing to put that forward. So thank you, everybody. I'll let you go on with the rest of your council meeting. And if there's other ways I can be helpful, let me know. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.
So
over to you, Mark.
Look, okay, thank you. Over to me. Look, before we start, I would like to thank the governance members for their ongoing commitment and contribution. I would also like to flag that the guy on the top left looks like a 1990s real estate agent. I really do need to update that 13-year-old photograph, I think, but yeah, maybe not. Okay, so look, thanks. So this session here is going to be a few of our governance group members sharing some of their wisdom and learnings relating to the session. I'd also like to just note that Chiquita, who's leading the portfolio for connected communities for us, and is in the transition unit at the moment, has clearly stated that Paiora legislation is aligning very well to connecting communities for well-being, and the work of the collaborative and us collectively very much aligns to that. So we're tracking in the right direction. We're heading the right way in terms of the Paiora bill. So what I'll do now is I will stop talking and hand over to our governance members who are going to present today, and thank them again for their commitment.
Well, I think you're faced up, Lance. I don't know if you want this slide to stay on screen. I can just leave it there and then take it off. Your call.
Well, you could leave it there for a couple of minutes, but I was just going to reflect. Thank you, Mark. So I was just going to reflect on how do we get to where we are today, or give or take the 1st of July, and I've just written down in reverse time sequence order. So 1st of July, we're going to have a piece of legislation called Paiora. I've read it with great interest. It's probably the most progressive piece of legislation I've ever read that embeds the Treaty of Waitangi and focuses on improving Māori. And those words don't normally come out of my mouth when it talks about legislation. I'll talk about Paiora separately in a little bit. Then I reflect, how did we get to that Paiora legislation? And that came out of a health and disability review, which was mildly painful for a few of us, but it actually got us to have a conversation, which was really the acknowledgement conversation. And then concurrently and prior to that, we had the Y2575 treaty claim that kind of said, we thought we should be doing much better as a country than we are, and we're not. And then if we go a few years back, there was this thing called 1840. There was a Treaty of Waitangi that actually was signed by a bunch of my ancestors, maybe a bunch of your ancestors. And then it effectively says that all Māori would have the same opportunity and the same access to all things in the country that they lived in. Now, history would tell us that did not occur. So it is mildly ironic, mildly sad, but also mildly pleasing that 182 years down the line, we actually will have a piece of legislation that actually will treat all New Zealanders equally, which is good, but sort of remedy some of that historical stuff. What I'm particularly pleased about with these healthcare changes is there's no more DHBs. Is probably my first comment. Apologies if you've ever worked for a DHB or some of your best friends are DHB workers. But DHBs have generally been a sort of master-slave sort of environment relationship. So it was very, very hard to have a sort of same level, cohesive, integrated healthcare conversation. They have not been proactive around primary care and investing in primary care and innovative solutions. They have not been proactive in investing in Māori healthcare. As a consequence, they've not been proactive in investing in Māori primary healthcare. In fact, Superior report says that in the last 20 years, there's been a $500 million to $1 billion underinvestment in primary healthcare, and as a consequence, we now need to spend $5 billion a year to get us back to where we should have been when the primary healthcare strategy came about. So, aroha mai, but good riddance to you and your colleagues. Now, what that becomes, I don't know. So the details, the devil's in the detail. But from a Māori perspective, having a iwi Māori Partnership Board made up of all Māori, not just 2 board members out of 9 who will get outvoted on a DHB, to keep our sort of healthcare system held to account. That's very helpful. Having a Māori Health Authority separate but concurrent, so that's the word they always forget when they say separate, it's also concurrent to the Māori Health Strategy is awesome. People ask me, is this a separate system, Lance? And this is the quick example I give them. I say, let's say there's 14 crayons on the table at school, and they're white crayons, and you and European people, you only play with those 14 white crayons, and then there's 6 black crayons, and my people just use those 6 black crayons. Now, what's going to happen in the future is I'm going to get my 6 black crayons, and I'm just going to use them a little bit differently. They're going to be better for me. I'm going to use them in a way that's strength-based. I haven't touched your 14 white crayons. We're still in the same kindergarten, we're still playing together, we're still nice, we're still cohesive. It's not a separate system. It's just a more coherent system, and I'm using my 6 crowns better than they were used previously. So that's how I explain people who say this is a separate system. It's not a separate system. Me and Fire Mill aren't going to have our own little Zoom going forward, and then you fellas are going to have your own Zoom. We're all going to have a collective Zoom and work happily together as one big happy family. So that's helpful, having a Māori Health Authority. Also having more focus. So the Paiora bill specifically, the purpose of Paiora is that all New Zealanders have the best health care they possibly could have. What a great first point. The second point of Paiora is that we will actively close the inequality gap between Māori and non-Māori. Actively close. And as of 1 July, that'll be a legislative requirement. So anybody in the healthcare system who doesn't actively close the equity gap between Māori and non-Māori is in breach of the legislation. That's against the law. So what you're going to find is that will move behavioural change significantly. So my final closing points are, if you haven't read Paiora legislation, I actively encourage you to read it, because that's what your life and career would look like post 1 July. I'd actively suggest you go back to your organisations you sit on, or might be on the board members or participate on. Look at your strategy. Does that align with what Paiora is saying? If it aligns, you'll be quite welcomed, no mai haere mai, to the new 1 July health space. If it doesn't align, you might want to reflect on how you could close some of those gaps. Do you have treaty partnerships with your organisation? Do you have cultural competencies frameworks to enable your staff to be able to deliver against Paiora? And do you actively work with your community to address some of the issues that are in your community? So those are just my final closing points. But happy to take any questions later on. I'm not sure how we're doing questions, Amajit. Are we doing them as we go or later on in the piece? But happy to take them as we go.
We'll do them later on the piece if that's okay. And Bridget's going to follow, so that's cool. You're happy for me to share Bridget's slide, Mark, and Faimel and Gary's? Oh.
Kia ora koutou, ko Bridget Allen toku ingoa, and I am like Chiquita, seeing that the work that Healthcare Home Collaborative and now Collaborative Aotearoa has done in the space of consumer voice and community voice is actually absolutely aligned with what Paiora will be requiring of us. I also want to pay tribute to our lived experience advisors who are all on this call today, Merle, Gary and Karoria. They enable us all to listen, and they encourage us to speak in the language of the one who is listening. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over now to Gary and then to Merle. So kia ora, Gary.
Kia ora, Bridget. Gary Sutcliffe, toko ingoa. I'm from Tamaki, Makaurau. I've been around the mainly mental health sector for many years, and I've sat around many tables as a consumer rep and consumer advisor, consumer advocate. I have to say that joining the governance board of the collaborative in September 2020 was a new and uplifting experience for me. It was new because this is primary care, and my previous life had been around the NGO sector. It was uplifting because most of my past experiences of sitting around tables at different levels of various organisations have been less than fulfilling for me. From the moment I talked with Amajit to my first meeting with the collaborative governance group, and since, I've just felt totally accepted and respected for who I am by everyone. I feel everyone around the collaborative's table, they listen to what I say, they genuinely want to hear what I have to say, and they frequently, often seek my opinion, not just through my own lived experience, but from a consumer perspective. Since May 2019, probably goes back a bit further, when Fire Merle was appointed onto the governance board of the then Healthcare Homes Collaborative, and through to my appointment in 2020 and the engagement of our fellow consumer advisor, Karoria Johns and Karoria Merle and I are part of the Health Navigators Consumer Advisory Service, now known as Woven. The collaborative, to me, and I think to all of us, the three of us, has demonstrated its commitment to elevating the voices of lived experience, not just through our appointments, but also in front of, and being in front of centre of the model of care and other important policies and documents from the collaborative. So kia ora whānau, it's a privilege to be part of this organisation. Whai Merle. Katie, are you there, Merle? You unmuted?
Mai tātou. I have trouble leaving when we leave, and I have trouble finding mute. Anyway, e ngā rauranga tira mai, noho mai nei ki te whakarunga ki te kōrero tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Gosh, it felt exciting, even to think that we were going to be able to share our journey. The journey, I thought, with healthcare homes at the time, it was like a mystery bus tour. I got on a bus and I didn't know where it was going. And on this bus, did I know even the people that were in the collaborative, in the governance board, in our council meetings? I did not. The collective of the information was there and they were freely sharing. But with that, the team actually came around, they uplifted, they enhanced the manaakitanga and the tautoko for myself and for Gary as new consumers in that space. It was big. And it's been big since we've been there. The commitment of our governance team has been, it has been such that the table that was set for our communities, for our whānau, for the nation, healthcare homes moved to Aotearoa, to collaborative Aotearoa. And this table that is set in the way of equity, I love that Lance has mentioned the 1st of July, because now that I understand more about equity, where I have come from in this journey, like Gary, we've been able to move through this and actually step up and realise within clinics, hospitals, through our practitioners and our nurses, but for us with the lived experience, we can see how clinics, clinicians, paediatricians, when they acknowledge that there is a problem in the clinics or within the organisation, that's when we, as the consumers, start to feel like we are being embraced and uplifted. We can hear when they're speaking in the language that we want to be able to connect, engage, and feel engaged with. The things that Paul mentioned this morning was very much how I believe healthcare homes right into collaborative Aotearoa have walked the journey in closing the gap. The pleasure to hear that the 1st of July will bring that 100 and how many years. And it's not about being late, it's about being there. My gratitude for being here for this platform and the sharing of today is one of many, from our HINS conference, from interviews, from the webinars that we have done, where we have spoken about the lived experience, our own consumer experience, and being able to share for the many of you that are listening, even today, we are at the right table. We are sitting with the right people. And I believe it is the right time. Everyone is stepping up and into that space. This is not a ROLE equity. This is you being authentically you. As a clinician, just be you. There's no past whakapapa to look at, nothing to look at. When the patient comes into the clinic, you are just being you. Mō tātou te iwi Māori, we will always come from what's on top of our head first, not the agenda that we rang the nurse for the day before. I believe that this whole journey that Aotearoa Collaborative will take nationally across New Zealand. Already we have 2 million people enrolled with Aotearoa Collaborative, 2 million plus, I believe. Since our enhanced model of care came out, as Māori, I think whakawhanaungatanga had to be in there. How were we going to engage and connect and make this happen so that others would know that the commitment of the people, the organisation, the many minds that have provided a program and approach to bring in and help the nation's well-being. Not only more, I don't want to be selfish and say it's only for us, tātou te iwi Māori, but we have been the forerunners for how many years where we are still searching. It was promised, and now today I am over the moon to hear that equity, that bias institutionalism will not live in this space anymore. It is not about trying to get it right. It is already there. Kei a koutou katoa te wero mo tēnei mahi, equity. No more language deficit where inequity is a word. Equity is the word now. Kei a koutou katoa, ko tēnā te wero. I'm going to leave it there. So my challenge to everyone is, take it up. Just be. Kia ora mai tata katoa, rauranga tira mai, whakarunga ana. Tēnā koutou a majit, kia koutou katoa tēnā. Koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Mel. Thank you very
Kia ora
much.
whae, Mel, and that was just beautiful as always. Thank you so much for helping us to stay true to our kaupapa all the way. And finally, just Kororia is also with us, and Kororia would encourage you for anything you would like to offer to our discussions this morning.
Ngā mihi, Bridget, and ngā mihi for the invitation to be here. I'm absolutely floored by the maturity that I've seen in organisations that I've witnessed this morning around the table. It's incredible and humbling to be a part of this journey. I guess the one thing that I've heard very clearly in this space is that there's an incredible amount of aroha and bravery here. You're willing to embrace the humanity behind what you do, not staying safe in the traditional spaces and roles. But one of the most brave things I've seen this morning was someone stepping up and saying, well, you know what, actually, we don't centre equity. We know we need to do better, but we don't. We're looking at that. And just that admission is so incredibly humbling to witness. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this journey, to witness the incredible work that's been done. And I guess I just want to reassure from my kind of place of touching lots of little places and little ways that the work that's been done here is incredibly, the recognition of how fundamental it is, how much it has to underpin what we do to create not just sustainable, but fulfilling places to work, places to visit, and places to give and receive is amazing. And I'm just so humbled, grateful, and I'm actually incredibly inspired by this group, because there's a lot of what I do where the fatigue and frustration is just a bloody grind at times. And to sit in this space and be so inspired and uplifted is incredibly humbling, and I'm grateful for it. Kia ora, thank you all so much.
So kia ora to all of my colleagues. You can see how blessed I am to work in this space with them. Back over to you, Mark and Amajit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bridget, and thanks all. Yeah, inspiring, and I never tire of listening to the kōrero here. I think it's Andrew next. I never tire of listening to you either, Andrew, just saying.
Too kind. Again, I mean, our lived experience is what we're here for, really. The people that we're working alongside is the reason we get up in the morning, I would have thought. I do a bunch of things. I've sort of had a few various roles, and I guess I'm also a lived experience advisor to a degree, in that I've had 2 serious types of cancer recently and managed to still be here talking to you, but it certainly focuses your vision on what it's like to be on the receiving end of the health system, which is actually pretty poor for most of us. Of all the things I do, I reckon this collaborative Aotearoa work is by far the most satisfying. I'm really quite privileged to be sitting in amongst you guys. I mean, it's helped me in my GP work, it's helped me with my patients. It's been really, for myself, showing I've had some personal growth and great support. And I can carry this into the other roles and places and apply it. Yesterday, Gloria and I sat for all day with a software vendor looking at the solution for our Northern Regional Collaborative Community Care software that will eventually get going. And we both sat there, I believe, carrying into this our collaborative Aotearoa hats to a degree, and that there's a recognition that unless we focus on what matters to whānau and what matters to people and have that embedded into how we approach our care, we're going to fail. And interestingly, the vendor yesterday was very technical all day till the last half an hour or 45 minutes, where they brought out their people and culture advisor who's using ADCAR ProSky type of processes. They've been working with Indigenous people in Australia, and in fact, they should have done that first, but it proved that they were actually more interested in the change and what the software could do for hauora and well-being than they were really in the product. But that in itself was quite a reassuring day, and we will be going into that, into that process with collaborative Aotearoa vision in mind. I think the other thing is we do, as a collaborative, tend to put the culture of what we do ahead of the strategy, and we are hopefully walking the walk. And I think we all do share our actions and visions. It's not a position just a few of us are trying to push along. What I've got in front of you, just as Wellbeing Well, was just created really out of slight frustration we had up in Northland around our shared care planning process, which had become somewhat focused on medical care, and really we as providers had recognised that that was a waste of time if you didn't actually approach what truly mattered to whānau and people, because if you can't resolve some of the things that bother them, engage and truly care for them, then we're going to miss the point. So we have been using this in my practice, and every time I present it, people say, "Oh, can I borrow it?" I think ProCare recently are going to embed this into their shared care software. I know that quite a number of people around the country are now using it. It's a very simple way of finding out what matters and focusing on that, because without doing that, then we're going to miss the point of it all. And again, I think the people we look after are the owners of both their information, but also self-determine what well-being looks like for them, and then we just participate as providers around what they need. And I'm really frustrated in my own role that when I ask these questions, I'm not being able to do as well as I could with spreading the load, pointing people in the right direction, and truly being able to care for them. And I think that's what localities should be aiming to do. We use this wheel well enough and applied it to enough people, would have a gap analysis and a stock take of where our services need to be better resourced and very much more likely to succeed by better engagement and better outcomes. And that's cheap. I think, Lance has said, what, $5 billion worth of under-resourcing. Most of this could be resolved if we resource community providers properly, the wider NGO grouping, volunteers, Māori Hauora organisations, and gave people the ability to sort themselves out with our help. I don't think we need to make it harder than it needs to be. Approach from the ground up, asking people what they need is super simple, can't be really argued in my view. I think that if we go down this route, we can't fail. I think just ending again, I have a sense of responsibility every time I go to work. My practice is eternally grateful really for Healthcare Homes, for what it's done to our own workload and how we're able to care for our patients. And our next block of work, which is look at collaborative impact and how we can empower localities, I think is even more important because it's wider. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I can't see we can't do it. We're able to do things because most people can't argue with what we're trying to do. If someone was to look at that wheel and said it's rubbish or that we shouldn't be focusing on these things in people's lives, then need to find something else to be doing. So that'll do, Mark. You've heard me often enough, and I'm very privileged and proud to be part of this organisation. So thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I'm still awake, so you're still hitting it. Well done. Thanks. Hey, so look, what I'll do now is I'll hand over to the team to share some of the practical aspects of our program, as well as our refreshed vision and mission. So look, as the team go through this, and there'll be an opportunity for questions later, we are seeking your and strongly encourage your feedback on this. So team, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. And I encourage you to, maybe stand up and stretch. We've been going for an hour and a half, and it's going to be a hard act to follow our prior speakers because there's just such gold and and inspiration. So thank you, everyone. We've got 20 more minutes to go. I promise we'll run through this practical but important session fairly quickly so that we can answer your questions. We are slightly over, but we'll pull the time back. Michael, can you share from slide 10 for me, please? Kia ora. Okay, so this is a slide that we thank you, Kirsten, and our designers for putting this together, trying to bring to life our vision and mission. And this was reset last year as part of our transition to collaborative Aotearoa. So both the vision and the mission are about equitable futures, supporting whānau to flourish. And I know that's absolutely close to your heart. But it is the promise in terms of our network and that practical lens that we feel is a point of difference in terms of the approach of the change and implementation on the ground. And what we love as a team, and you'll hear from the team very, very soon, we love walking alongside those at the front line to share and fast track the learning. We're kind of working on a bit of a saying, which is like we want our sector to adapt and learn faster than any other. So in terms of the peer learning approach, we want to catalyze that. So in terms of our values, moving on, Michael. In terms of our values, these were developed as part of the enhancement of the healthcare home mahi in support of equity and honour and te tiriti. And these underpin all of our programs. And Fire Mill was at the helm of that. And that's where my real journey of collaborative Aotearoa, or healthcare home collaborative and collaborative Aotearoa, really truly started. And so she knows how grateful, and to all of our lived experience, but Fire Mill in particular has been inspirational to us. So the next slide around field catalyst, we just want to drop this seed in, a bit wordy on the slide itself, but whilst we've been a catalyst for change and implementation for some time, a field catalyst like our partner organisation at Tamarack plays a bigger role in accelerating, weaving, building trust and influencing. And we've got more to share on that in future. We have done a bit of work where there's a short video on our website, but watch this space. We really want to fulfill this role so that we can make a bigger impact across our network to support, basically. So moving to 13. Michael. So anyone who knows us, and you've heard this morning from our lived experience, we put a huge value and, you know, really take a leadership from our lived experience. And this has made the biggest difference to us. And I really liked what Paul talked about in terms of the work from overseas. Whilst what's important is our own identity as Aotearoa, but we can still learn from far and wide. And they talked about giving lived experience the last word, the last vote in terms of, you know, that decide and vote. And I think if we're going to be brave, let's explore that more. And then in terms of our clinicians, Andrew has been with us from the get-go in terms of our collaborative mahi, and Jeff Lowe, who's an apology today, also really, you know, influence our models of care work, but also, you know, bring in, as Andrew said, his own lived experience lens. Dr. Kirsty Lennon, she couldn't make it today, but I do remember when we did the enhanced model of care, she beavered away in the background on every one of those 38 characteristics in our model of care, and is still with us on our journey, and you know, ensuring from a practical on the ground general practice perspective, we get it right in a way that works. So yes, we are absolutely grateful. And then our team, there is one new member coming into our team that I haven't got a photograph of, and but she's just in the process of changing over. But I think it was Claudia who said to us, you know, you might be a small team, but you're mighty, you know. So yeah, I am, you know, privileged to be working with this group. And our youngest member, Michael, keeps us on our toes as the only male in our team. So thank you, Michael, for that. Then we want to just get into some of the real sort of nuts and bolts of our program. And I'm sorry, I am going fast, just so we can open the floor. In terms of the financial details, what I've focused on here is our revenue, which is coming from our membership base, our 17 PHO members, some joint members in there, and our contractual revenue from central agencies. And so you can see this sort of the doubling of the dollars post the first lockdown. It was because we were focusing in that telehealth space, but also strengthening the lived experience and the regional support. So it's a, you know, it's a small budget, but we, you know, we can do some great things because of our network of leads, and a network of, you know, is absolutely vital to us. And we're grateful, obviously, for those members that have confirmed their 22-23 membership, and we are in discussions with some others that are keen to be involved in our mahi and gather that support from us, because we're absolutely, you know, committed to serving. So this slide here is an overview slide of collaborative Aotearoa, with our 3 core programs of work that are currently healthcare home, digital health, and localities, a collective impact approach. We are working with the centre to sort of ensure that we're complementary, so that, you know, we're joined up in terms of any support. So yeah, you can see there yourselves in terms of a lot of the sharing and learning. Hopefully your teams have enjoyed some of the webinars, the peer sessions, etc. So they will carry on, and you know, the Kirsten has a whole forward program of ideas there. So I'm going to pause and hand over to Jo, so that she can give you a bit of an update on healthcare home and digital health. And Jo's stepping in for, as I say, our other member of the team. So thank you, Jo, and then we'll hear from Kenita.
All good. Well, kia ora koutou. So Mel and I are really building upon the legacy of the work that Jess White has done for healthcare home, and I guess we're starting with I guess a phased approach based on the current climate and what's going on out there, and really meeting our practices and understanding what's on top for them, what parts of the program bring them value. Are we really interested in increasing and intensifying support around their own capability to lead change and to implement and utilise lean a lot more? I think the 9 points there don't really reflect the 9 million points and tasks that Amarjit has us doing. We continue to build and drive on telehealth because that's relevant and increases access and engagement, not just rurally, but across the board, and it's patient-centred. So just to summarise, because it's a bit speedy now, we are really reading the room in terms of understanding where our practices are at and really trying to meet them. So working with the PHO leads to understand where are our practices at and how do we get them back to, if they're not, looking at the value in the program. Mel and I are really interested in running a lot more value stream mapping workshops in the next 12 months to identify some of the bottlenecks and waste that are occurring in general practices. I think that's probably about it, just in terms of time. I think the slides speak for themselves, but I do want to highlight working with our people around raising that awareness of, just put it there, exploring what it means to general practices as an anchor partner with a locality and what it means to be, you know, a centre of wellness. So really exploring that more and really starting to change how practices see themselves. That's probably enough from me, but happy to take any questions when we get to the end. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Jo. Yes, there are a million tasks, and we have to remember we have, you know, our well-being to look after as well. So we're very aware of that. So over to you, Kanita.
Wonderful. Kia ora koutou, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. Lovely to see you all here today, and just want to mihi out to Gwinnett from Ngāti Porou Hauora coming along and just kind of checking us out. It's wonderful to have you here. So in terms of the localities program with a particular focus on collective impact, we've been engaged in quite a bit of mahi, and yep, you're right there, Jo. Amajit has been keeping us extremely busy. So the points here are just kind of a really short summary. The work in itself has been sort of broken down into 3 areas. One has been around resource development. So there's been a couple of co-design sessions, one held in relation to the localities readiness matrix. That's pretty much in draft format and ready for a kind of engagement session with our national team, national office, and then hopefully moving towards a pilot of the readiness matrix using within our network. And the other tool we've been developing is the collective impact online learning module. There was a co-design session done around that a couple of weeks ago. I'm really grateful for people who've given their time into those spaces. We've had a really good mix of general practice, PHO CEO, equity lead, lived experience, all participating and giving us their wisdom and insights into those tools. Another tool that we're looking at developing at the moment is we've engaged a community engagement lead to help us build a community engagement toolkit, which can be used through some prototypes. The 9 prototypes are on offer to, or also out wider to our membership. So it's great to have a lead on board to help us develop that toolkit. The second tranche of work we've been involved in is a lot of meetings and engagement, getting on top and understanding what's happening at a national level around localities. And that's really to ensure that the mahi that we're doing is complementary to the mahi that is rolling out. And there's quite a bit of momentum happening nationally now. And you'd see a few updates, particularly the New Zealand Māori Health Authority newsletter for April, a podcast that Martin Hefford was part of, the System Fix for New Zealand doctors, 2 really good resources to listen to and read and understand some of the detail coming out around localities. Our focus obviously has been around localities within a collective impact approach. So that's kind of where we've been focusing ourselves. And lastly, the third tranche is really thinking about te tiriti and what that means for us as an organisation, as individuals, as a team, as an organisation and as a sector, in terms of infusing te tiriti in all our mahi and ensuring that we are being accountable back to that and back to the sector. So that's pretty much a quick summary of our mahi. There's much more underneath, as you can imagine, but yeah, as others have said, it's been great to be part of this work for the collaborative. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, ngā mihi kanisa. And our final slide, and then I'm going to hand back to Mark, are about opportunities for the future, really just to set that scene. And we would love the feedback, not necessarily through even this session, but follow up in terms of how you see the opportunities for our collaborative, because ultimately we are serving the sector. So some of the things the team and I have put together here are supporting, there's that potential for supporting other models of care, taking our infrastructure, our framework, and applying them to other models of care in terms of that online learning not online, in terms of that peer-to-peer learning platform. Obviously complementing the national localities team, and Kanita is working in conversations closely there so that we're aligned and so that it's made easy for the sector. Sharing our expertise and wisdom, again, in terms of that peer-to-peer learning, national collaboration, just broadening that. Obviously, we have, like our supporting partners are here today, so we're looking at that. How do we enhance our collaboration with our supporting organisations as we raise our head above, the COVID period still there, but, we feel like we're coming out at the other end. Let's get back into those, conversations of, well, let's ensure we're aligned. Let's ensure what we're doing is absolutely complementary and there's no duplication, because we're very small organisations. We want to use the building blocks of healthcare home to support the modernised approach of general practice, and that's a very generalised way of explaining. But those general practices that don't have some of those more modern attributes in the future really need to be supported on that journey. And the building blocks, there's a nice achievable set of characteristics there. Obviously, our focus on telehealth and what that looks like in a locality setting. We might not be the doers of the mahi, but just helping the thinking and being that catalyst for it. And then partnering with other field catalysts so that the primary and community sector adapts, learns faster than any other. We've got good, strong relationships with the universities, and we want to absolutely leverage their knowledge and insights so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And that's it from me. Over to you, Mark. There's the next slide, Michael, that Mark will then open the floor.
Kia ora, Amajit, and thank you guys. Thank you, team. As I say, a small team, but the outputs are huge. So on behalf of the governors and from the chair, heartfelt thanks for the work, dedication, loyalty, and commitment to the greater good. Thank you, guys. Hey, look, I'll put this whakatauki up here, and you can all see it now. Whaia Merle brought this to us. Thank you, Whaia Merle. But I think it's a great way of describing our place in the world and our intent and our focus for the future. Paitia te ara, tika pumau ai te, ngatiratanga, mōna uri, whakatipu. Foster the pathway of knowledge to strength, independence, and growth for the future. So now I'd like to open up for questions. We've got a very short period of time. So if you don't get a chance to ask a question today, I'm sure Amajit and the team would welcome questions via email. We'll open up for questions before we close. Maybe we have plenty of time for questions then.
I think our audience is stunned, Mark.
Bridget's got a hand up.
Yep. So it's such a fast-moving thing. There were some things I've learned today that even as a member of the governance group were new to me. So thanks to all of our team for the amazing mahi that they do. But I was just wondering, Kanita, could you just talk a little bit more about that community engagement lead and what's going to be happening in that space? That sounded really exciting.
Yeah, sure, I can, Bridget. So we have Alex Nichols on board giving us a little bit of her time. Alex did a lot of the community leadership work for Counties Manukau some years back, and a really wise young Pacific woman, amazing. So she's pulling together a toolkit of different community engagement tools and techniques and an approach that could be used as prototypes or localities start to step in to look at community engagement. And so that toolkit will be available to our members, where it's based around organising communities concept. It's got the idea of building a very small community-led team, individuals that are well connected in that community around different priority populations, around training and building that community capability, about going out and with different tools and techniques, engaging communities around understanding whānau community aspirations, and then that building back into the whole locality plan, into the work of the strategies and the models of care that'll be developed as part of that leadership, as part of the partnership network, which is the delivery arm of a lot of that mahi. So yeah, that's it in a sort of nutshell.
Brilliant, thanks Kanita. Any further questions? Look, guys, there's no pressure, as I said. If you've got anything that pops up over the coming days, just email the team and they'll be happy to respond. And Amaji, all the resources will be shared from today. So yeah, this stuff will be shared around. Okay, well, miraculously, we're pretty much running to time, which is unusual when I'm sharing anything. So look, thank you all for coming along. It's been an absolute pleasure to have the kōrero today. I think it's been rich for all of us. And just that coming together and sharing is awesome. We're obviously clearly aligned in this space. There's a shared vision and a shared passion, and your commitment to this is gratefully acknowledged pretty much every time we come together. Without you, we can't do what we do. So thank you, and keep doing the good work. Amaji, okay if we close? Are we happy with that? Yeah. So Whaia Merle, would you be kind enough to give us a closing karakia?
Ai, ka pai tēnā kia hau. Aroha mai, Mark and Amaji, you have asked me, and I did open. I'm wondering, Lance, without taking anything else away, e hia ana koe ki te hei mahi kai whakarite?
Ka pai. I can close for us, whānau. Thank you for our good mahi, and we hope you have an excellent day for the rest of the day, and I'll just close this. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhao tō tātou I karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi nā taitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, amene.
Amene.
Kia ora, Lance, thank you. And that's it. So go well, take care. Mā te wā.
Mā te wā.